I'd like to talk about your early years of practice, and in particular, because things have changed so much, magistrates that you appeared before. In those days, they were, as you've mentioned in your memoir, police magistrates. They didn't have formal qualifications, but they nevertheless quite often had a lot of common sense and experience of human nature. And there was one, I believed, you referred to one who's known as Smiling Death.
Yes, Smiling Death Debenham. There were two Debenhams. There was Smiling Death and there was Country Cousin. Country Cousin I appeared a lot before, because at one stage I did a lot of work for one of the debt collectors, Van Brown and Co. Through a solicitor, of course, and that involved appearances in the Small Debts Court, what was then the Small Debts Court, you would know. And Country Cousin Debenham was a lovely fat fellow with a beautiful smile and lots of common sense about law, about the sort of law he was dealing with. Smiling Death sat at Redfern and doing primarily crime, and most of the profession and all the crims loathed him. He also had the facility to have the clock in his chambers at a different set, 5 minutes different from the clock in the court, so that he would go into court 5 minutes late and knock off 5 minutes early.
And Smiling Death, of course, was the name given to him because?
Because he always had the nicest smile on his face when he handed down a very unpleasant sentence.
I suppose these days he'd be known as a smiling assassin.
Yes.
The fact that they didn't have formal qualifications, there has been interesting discussions that I've had with other people I've interviewed who said that sometimes that led to the appearance of colluding with the police.
Oh, yes, but I don't think that was so much the lack of formal qualifications as the fact that, particularly in those days, I think, and it's still, who else could they mix with? A magistrate would go on circuit to a medium-sized country town. If he wanted to have a drink at the end of the day, who could he have a drink with? It would have been possible for the local solicitors to make friends with the magistrates, but whether they were able to do so or whether it was convenient, so that and it was the police who staffed the court and so forth. There's no doubt that that in those days they were, as I said, police magistrates. Both that was their title and that was what they were. But I don't think it was particularly deliberate. That's just the way it's turned out. And I don't think that the fact that they're now got formal qualifications has necessarily made any difference, I think.
And why do you think that? Because I'm really interested to know. I have talked to others who've said that their knowledge of human nature often made them a lot shrewder than perhaps someone who might have the formal qualifications but not necessarily the experience.
I think that's right. I was going to say that I think that nowadays we, of course, have much. We're bombarded with the idea of lack of bias and so forth. There are more magistrates so that they can and they can mix together much more easily. They have. I'm sure it's quite different, but I don't necessarily think that that's because of their having to have formal qualifications. Now, nowadays, of course, many of the magistrates are appointed from the practicing profession. I don't know that it happens so often in the state sphere, but certainly federal magistrates are nearly always come from having practiced in the profession, and they are therefore, of course, quite different. Did I in my lecture, did I tell the story about the judge in Newcastle?
I'd be happy to hear it.
When a magistrate goes to court, he is always accompanied by a sergeant of police. When a district court judge goes to court, he is always accompanied by an inspector. And when a Supreme Court judge goes to court on circuit, he is always accompanied by a superintendent. And this story concerns a very, quite a very old story before my time. It concerns Mr. Justice Bonney, who was a very formal Supreme Court judge. Indeed, at least on the first day in court and when he was doing his circuit, he would wear the full thing: morning suit, striped back trousers, spats, and wear a top hat as he went to court. And as I have said, he would be accompanied by the sergeant. The sergeant would be accompanied by an inspector, and the inspector would be accompanied by a superintendent, all in full uniform. And the judge, when on circuit in Newcastle, always stayed at the Newcastle Club, which is just next door to the Newcastle Cathedral. And you would walk along, whatever the name of the street is, about 200 yards to the courthouse. Well, and in those days, I'm back to the Landlord and Tenant Act again, there were a whole, on the western side of the street, there are a whole series of terrace houses, all under the Landlord and Tenant Act, and many of them not terribly well repaired. And on this particular February morning, on the first day of the sittings of the February sittings, the judge and this entourage are walking along, and it's a hot day, and all the houses had their front doors open so they could get the breeze blowing through. And as they walked past one house, a voice from inside was heard to say, "Geez, Gert, come and look, they've arrested the bloody undertaker."